Welcome back to Focus Life Discussions. Here we are again, getting ready to get into another topic. We're going to talk about how to get beyond blaming. We're going to deal with some solutions and how to move you forward so that you don't have to blame one another or point the finger. There are some godly solutions to moving beyond blaming. We know that nothing productive can come from it. We learned in the previous segments how it tears at intimacy. Number 2, it hinders personal growth. We learned that it creates tension and hostility. And number 4, it's counterproductive. So we discovered what blaming can do and how it can really hurt the marital covenant that God has established. So let's spend some time discussing how to get beyond blaming and move toward a holistic and healthy as well as godly practice and or solution. So go on, grab your Bible, get your notepad or whatever you record your notes on. Don't forget your spouse. Let's sit down and discuss together how to move beyond blaming. How do we get beyond blaming? Number 2, take personal responsibility. Yes, take personal responsibility. Own your part and recognize your weaknesses. You know, that is something that is very underrated in marriage, where we own our part. We're constantly looking into our spouse's lives, thoughts, responses, etc. However, when we really take a close look at where we are and what's going on within us, sometimes we can really find our part in the whole difficulty and or challenge that takes place in the marriage. But it's so easy to look at the other individual, that is your spouse, and point out all of the negativities, all of the things that are ungodly or distasteful, things that you don't appreciate. And yet there are things within you that may be causing a lot of the disruption and contention in the relationship. Maybe, maybe not. But how would you know without taking a closer look at your thoughts, your words, that is the way you say, do, and or respond to things, along with your actions? And that's where we're going in this particular segment. How do we get beyond constant blaming? Number 1, we said, make intimacy your primary objective. That is, protect your intimacy. That's where you thrive in your marriage. That's where all of your thoughts and your vulnerability and your connectivity takes place. That is the deepest place of the heart where God and your spouse lives. And number 2, take personal responsibility. It's very important, which involves taking a closer look at the way you're thinking. That is, how are you processing information? How are you feeling? What's going on in your head? And then, how do you use your words? What types of words are you using? And then your actions. So when we evaluate and or examine ourselves within the relationship, and this can work in any setting, whenever we plug in these 3 components. That is, number 1, we evaluate the way that we're thinking, how we're processing the information that's being given to us. Number 2, we take a look at our words, how we are using those words, the types of words we're using. And then number 3, we closely look at our actions. How are we coming off? So whenever self-evaluation takes place, we can go back and plug in these 3 components, and they will reveal just where we are. We can't get away from it. How we think, what we say, and our behavior. When we answer those questions, what are we thinking? That is how we're processing information, the types of words we're using and how we're using those words. And we look at our behavior and our responses or actions. We can answer those 3, then we can evaluate successfully and see where we are in the relationship. All right, now let's move on. We've covered that. That was very important because whenever we self-evaluate, it involves our looking at ourselves. And that's not always an easy thing to do, especially when you're set on blaming someone else, pointing the finger, seeing all of their faults, all of the things they do wrong or could have done better. When that happens, we move ourselves away from the most important part of our growth, which is evaluating who we are. That is, what do we bring to the table? What's going on within us that either drives the marriage forward or causes the marriage to sit and park? That means it doesn't go anywhere. It's just sitting there day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. What are we contributing? And that's the most healthy part of any relationship, is when we look within ourselves and we can answer the question, how am I thinking? That is, what's going on in my head that could be contributing to my words and the way that I use those words, and at some point will come out in my actions, because it all starts in the way that we think. And that is how we're processing the information that's been given to us. And then after we process that information, they turn into words that can be filled with grace or words that can be very distasteful. And then from that point, we move into an action and or behavior that's either godly or ungodly. So let's say it again. How do we move beyond blaming? By taking personal responsibility. Now, this doesn't mean that you ignore what you're feeling or turn away from any pain or hurt that you experienced in the relationship or from your spouse. That doesn't mean that you put that aside or you deny that it ever happened. However, what it does acknowledge is that you are going to take accountability and or responsibility for your actions and how you respond and or handle the situation. Because let's face it, we're going to do and say things that hurt one another because, again, we're imperfect people. We live in these bodies. And again, that's no excuse. However, we do know that there will be moments and or times in the marriage that we are not going to be our best. Let's face it. And if you've been married any length of time, you know that to be true. We're not going to be a 10 every day. So things are going to be said, words are going to be exchanged, emotions are going to be thrown out there, and sometimes actions will be ungodly. But because of the forgiving nature of God that is on the inside of us, we have a power to move beyond certain things that are not godly. And let's reiterate this. That does not give your spouse the license to pierce your heart, to willfully hurt you, to tear you down. No, just because we have the forgiving nature of God on the inside of us. And God forbid, if this kind of thing is constantly happening, then it's time to seek the Lord in how to put boundaries there so that you can protect yourself from verbal and emotional abuse. Now, if that kind of thing is happening in the marriage, it's an indication that it's in trouble and it needs outside help. But prayerfully, your situation is not to that extreme or degree. But you may have some mild blaming going on in there, pointing the finger, some passive aggressive ways that are taking place. Maybe you aren't the type that yell or scream, but you say things in a way to get across your point, and it's in a passive aggressive manner. You may have some things going on like that, a bit of sarcasm, sometimes words in passing, a little disdain with those words and how you say them. And that is just as severe, because those are the little things that cause great big catastrophes to take place in the marriage. It's the little foxes that destroy the vine. Remember that. Okay, so let's move on. Now, we said it doesn't mean that you ignore how you feel or turn away from any pain that has taken place in the relationship or marriage. However, what it does indicate is that you're going to take responsibility for how you handle the situation. You won't become ungodly because the situation, unfortunately, has become ungodly. You won't allow yourself to dishonor God and what you know to be true and or has been established between you and God, because the closeness that you share with him is how you establish your place of peace. And that is so important, to have that internal point or place of peace through your covenant and your connection with God. So you don't want to come out of that because the situation is messy or the situation or circumstance is very ungodly or unhealthy. No, you want to remain composed. Again, that does not mean you don't hurt, you don't have an emotion, you don't feel some kind of way. It's how you respond. It's not what takes place, it's how you respond to what takes place. And listen, in marriage, there will always be some type of response we will have. The objective is to make sure that we're having a godly response. And you know that takes work. That takes day by day plugging into God, connecting with him, allowing his words to fill your heart, studying the scriptures, and making application of it. That is, when it comes out. The process works like this. Whatever I've been putting into my heart, that is between myself and God, now it's coming back out. Whatever I've been studying, it comes back out. Whatever my prayers have been about, now, God, here is the time for it to manifest during interaction with my spouse. Everything that has been going on between you and God, you now have an opportunity to show it to your spouse. Oh, but wait a minute. There are times where all of that good stuff that goes on between you and God, and it doesn't come out. You're saying, I know that I've been in a place with God. I know that things have been going well in my personal study and moments with the Lord. And all of a sudden, the exact opposite takes place. Have you ever experienced that? I know that I have. And it can be frustrating because you know in your heart what place you've been in with God. But then your spouse comes along and says something, does something that irritates you to no end. And all of what you studied, all of the prayers that you've invested in, your worship, your singing, all of that, it doesn't show up. What shows up is frustration or irritation or a response to the situation that is opposite of the person you're becoming. And that's why self-examination is so important. You know, I just thought that to be interesting because we know that we spend time with God. We know that we love him. We're born of his spirit. And yet the exact opposite comes out. The Apostle Paul said in Romans chapter 7, in my flesh, there's no good thing. To will is present with me. How to perform it, I cannot find it. I mean, he went on with this whole thing. You have to look at Romans chapter 7, starting at verse 18 down to verse 24. He said, "O wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me from the body of this death?" So he was really sincere and adamant about this thing. He said, I delight in the law of God after the inward man. I know what's been going on between God and myself. But yet I find another law, that when I would do good, evil is present with me. So who can bring out some of those areas that are not so kind? Nobody can do it quite like your spouse. And that's where the test is. It's not when you're in church lifting your hands and praising God and singing worship songs. It's when you close those doors and it's your spouse and yourself. And there'll be moments where you will be tried and tested, and it's not even really your spouse. A lot of this is just the agitation and the stress that comes upon a marriage by living in a fallen world. And that's where you have to join together. And let's go back to it. Number one, how do we get beyond blaming? You must protect that place of intimacy. You must make that your primary objective. Listen, you and your spouse have to say within yourselves, we can't let anything disrupt our place of intimacy. That's where we thrive. That's who we are. That's where we show ourselves to one another. We cannot have our intimacy strained, our close moments, the times that we need to interact with one another, because that's where God lives and that's where he gets involved. And then this second thing that we're talking about here in segment number 6, we're talking about, hey, listen, we have to take personal responsibility for our actions. Your spouse cannot be responsible for what you think, speak, and or do. You have to take responsibility for that. And your spouse has to take responsibility for his or her thoughts, words, and actions. And that all takes place within the relationship that we have with God. Although you're married, there is a personal time that you and your spouse should have with God. And speaking of that, in Psalm 139, verses 23 through 24, very powerful. The psalmist said, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxieties, and see if there is any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." Two powerful verses that epitomize the heart of the psalmist saying to God, something can get in there. Something is likely to find its way in the most deepest and sacred places of my existence, and I can't have this thing here because it's going to affect my words. It's going to come out within my actions. Therefore, he says, search me, O God. Now, what if we said that every day we came before God during our time of prayer? I mean, we talk to God about a lot of things. And what if we said within that prayer, every day, search me, O God? Because when we go to God, typically a lot of times we have information already in our heads that we want to talk to God about, thoughts and feelings. And this is why a lot of times we sit down to have conversation with him, because there are things we're feeling, moments that we want to share with him about what's going on in our thought process. But yet the psalmist said, search me, O God. I wonder if I could say that every day when I'm praying, when I sit down and talk to God, not looking at my wife, looking at myself. Search me, O God. The psalmist didn't say search them, O God. No, search me, O God. And if that could be on my lips every single day, that I say to God, search me, know me, try me, O God. Look at my heart. Look inside of me and let me know if there's something that's growing there that's not consistent with your nature. And I don't want to rush just into what I want and the things I want God to move and to change I don't want these selfish prayers. And when we can evaluate ourselves, examine who we are, and ask God to help us in this evaluation, we can grow and evolve in his nature. That's a very critical point of spiritual maturity and or growth, when we can own our part in any matter, when we can see not only the good things, the way that we are growing and becoming more like Jesus, but then we can also evaluate those gray areas, and we can really face them and take them head on and say, okay, I know that's not like you, God. I know I did not respond in the way that I should have. So I want you to search me. I want you to try me and know my anxieties, know my ways, and see if there is any wicked way in me, and lead me. Not only to see if it's there, but now lead me out of it. I don't want this in me. Lead me in the way everlasting. So that was a very powerful passage there. Just 2 verses, Psalm 139, verses 23 and 24. What if that was in our conversation with God every day? The outcome may be a greater self-awareness, more personal accountability and or responsibility in the marriage. And then we would find ourselves being more composed during those challenging moments. And I want to leave you with a few scriptures that will help even as we go forward, because when we evaluate our thoughts, words, and actions, and we do this within our personal time with God, it contributes to our spiritual growth. And that's the aim, to grow spiritually, to look more like Jesus, to handle things the way Jesus would handle things, to live out his teachings and to be his disciples indeed. And our personal time with God are those quiet moments where we can reflect. We all need time for reflection. And in those moments of reflection, here are some questions that maybe you can ask yourself. Could I have responded in a Christ-like manner? How about this one? Am I allowing hurt and anger to guide my conversation with my spouse? That's a very important question to ask during moments of reflection. Am I allowing my hurt and anger to guide my conversation with my spouse? Another question that may come to mind, what's my position in the situation? That is, what could I do to be a strength and not a hindrance to our challenges? I don't want to add to it. I want to be a strength to it. So those are some common questions. Could I have responded in a Christ-like manner? Am I allowing hurt and anger to guide my conversation with my spouse? Because a lot of times hurt is coming out and anger is there. And so it just goes into words, and then from words to actions. And then what's my position? What could I do to be a strength and not a hindrance? So those are some common questions that maybe during times of reflection, you may want to ask yourself. It's healthy to take inventory of our thoughts and our words and actions. This is needed at every level of spiritual maturity. Jesus spoke about judging others. He said, listen, how can we judge someone else if there's a beam in our own eyes? So self-evaluation and or examination is very important. It's critical to the evolution of your spiritual growth as a Christian man or Christian woman, not just as a husband or wife, but as a Christian man or Christian woman, because how you connect with God will show up, or should show up, let me say it that way, in your interactions every day. And if your time with God is not translated into those interactions, there's a disconnect coming from somewhere. And a lot of times it's because we get pulled into the challenge. Instead of maintaining godly composure and godly character, we allow whatever's going on to pull us into it, and we respond according to the flesh or the former nature. That's when those emotions are thrown everywhere and words are tossed around in an ungodly way. Don't allow the challenge or the situation to pull you into it. Allow what you've been establishing between yourself and God to show up. And remember, that's a day-by-day process. Every day, living out your faith. And here we are, toward the end of our segment. Let's close out on this particular statement. Are you ready? When we abide in truth and ask God for help in difficult matters within the marriage, we can say like the psalmist in Psalm 26, 1-3. Let me read this statement again. When we abide in truth and ask God for help in difficult matters in the relationship, we can say like the psalmist in Psalm 26, 1-3. Vindicate me, O Lord, for I have walked in my integrity. I have also trusted in the Lord. I shall not slip. Examine me, O Lord, and prove me. Try my mind and my heart, for your loving kindness is before my eyes, and I have walked in your truth. Hey, here's another one. Psalm 119, verses 54-60. The psalmist rejoices because he has kept the word of the Lord. This is what he says. Your statutes have been my songs in the house of my pilgrimage. I remember your name in the night, O Lord, and I keep your law. This has become mine because I kept your precepts. You are my portion, O Lord. I have said that I would keep your words. I entreated your favor with my whole heart. Be merciful to me according to your word. I thought about my ways, and I turned my feet to your testimonies. I made haste and did not delay to keep your commandments. Two powerful passages. That's Psalm 26, 1-3, Psalm 119, 54-60. Whenever we abide in God and we begin to translate our time with him into our marriages, we can have these two passages as our testimonies. Thank God for this particular segment. How do we avoid constantly blaming? Number 2, by taking personal inventory, self-accountability, responsibility for our actions. And they involve 3 things: the way that we think, the words we use or how we use them, and then our actions. God bless, and we'll talk again soon.